At this afternoon's top stories, Prime Minister Harris expresses condolences to the British government after brutal attacks on UK Parliament. St. Lucia's Prime Minister welcomes new British High Commissioner. Hello and welcome to the ZIZ Midday Newscast. Today is Friday, March 24th, 2017. I am Shaira Flanders. Nationally, Chairman of the OECS Authority and the Regional Security Systems RSS Council of Ministers, Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, expresses condolences to the British government and people whose capital city was recently attacked near the Parliament this week. He said, quote, "The government and people of CARICOM and the OECS extend our heartfelt sympathy to the bereaved families and friends of the persons who were killed in a car attack on Westminster Bridge and to the bereaved family and friends of the police officer who was killed in a knife attack outside the Parliament. We pray for all of them as well as for the injured and their loved ones," the Prime Minister said upon learning of the fatal incident that struck at the heart of London. "It is in these agonizing moments that we not only grasp the frailty and fragility of life, but we also hold firm to our resolve as responsible and compassionate members of the international community to stand up to evil and support our brothers and sisters at home and around the world, wherever and whenever it occurs," he said. He also added that as the authorities investigate the terror attack, we join with Britain's Prime Minister, the Honourable Theresa May, in commending the exceptional bravery of the police and security services who work valiantly and tirelessly so that freedom can reign throughout the world, enabling our governments, nations and peoples to build peaceful societies for humanity and posterity, Prime Minister Dr. the Honourable Timothy Harris further stated. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis and our counterparts in the Caribbean region unequivocally condemn in the strongest terms any assault on our sense of security. We pledge our unwavering support to Britain during this difficult time as the international community coalesces around it to send the strong message that terror cannot, will not and must not prevail. Several terrorist attacks occurred on the Westminster Bridge and UK Parliament on Wednesday, March 22nd. An update on the progress and plans for the new Bastia High School, issues relating to Carnival 2016-2017, and the approval of the relocation of the Federation's embassy in Washington, D.C. to more conducive facilities were among the topics discussed at the most recent meeting of Cabinet. Chaired by Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, the Cabinet meeting held on Monday, March 20th, the first homeowners initiative, was also discussed. In a post-Cabinet briefing, Director General of the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, Lesroy Williams, outlined the decisions that were made in that regard.
As part of the government's overall program to spur economic activity through construction and in particular through residential activity, the Cabinet on the 20th of March determined that it should extend the first-time homeowners initiative for a 2-year period from 2016 to the end of December 2018. In extending that program, the Cabinet has made it possible for successful applicants to be able to receive waiver of customs service charges and duty-free concessions on building materials for property to the tune of $400,000.
Cabinet also gave support to a number of projects under the Citizenship by Investment program.
Cabinet pledged that it will continue to enhance its due diligence processes and ensure that only the most discerning investor would be successful under the CBI program. Cabinet was reminded of the extensive reforms undertaken thus far by the new administration. St. Kitts and Nevis will continue to work with other member states within the region to harmonize legislative policies and procedures regarding the CBI program.
The ECTEL, or Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority presentation, which was done on the 18th, was also discussed, and ECTEL Chairman Senator the Honorable Vincent Byron sensitized the Cabinet on the draft Electronics Communications Bill, which is to be adopted by all ECTEL member countries. Moving on to news on the regional scene, Prime Minister Alan Chastanet has welcomed the United Kingdom's new resident High Commissioner Steve McCready to St. Lucia. A former chief of staff to the governor of Anguilla, Steve McCready officially took up office on March 20th. We hear more in this St. Lucia report.
It was described as an official welcome that evoked mixed feelings. A warm, pleasant occasion to welcome the British government's new resident High Commissioner to St. Lucia. But the ceremony set against the backdrop of the UK's deadliest terror attack in 12 years. Mr. Steve McCready began his diplomatic posting to St. Lucia on March 20th. A career diplomat, he is the former chief of staff to the governor of Anguilla and previously worked as a private secretary to foreign and Commonwealth foreign ministers covering the Caribbean and the Commonwealth. On Thursday, March 23rd, Prime Minister Alan Chastanet officially welcomed McCready to St. Lucia.
On behalf of all solutions, I want to say thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
And to thank your government for staying committed to St. Lucia. It could have been, in these economic times, very easy for the UK to have consolidated their offices in Barbados. And it's not gone unnoticed and certainly not gone unappreciated. On a sadder note, I wanted to be able to read a statement, if I could, with regards to the events that took place yesterday in London. So, the government and the people of St. Lucia received with sadness the news of the deadly attack at Westminster yesterday on the 22nd of March 2017, which claimed innocent lives and left many wounded. We offer prayers for their families, loved ones, and friends of all who are affected by this senseless tragedy.
High Commissioner McCready says it is an honor to represent his country in St. Lucia. He says St. Lucia and Britain share a close and important relationship and pledged to strengthen ties. He also expressed thanks for the outpouring of emotion from the St. Lucian community in the aftermath of the March 22nd London terror attack.
I want to thank the Prime Minister very much for his words of support and condolence for the tragic events in the UK yesterday. Our Prime Minister has spoken to our Parliament in the UK about this, but it's very clear at a time like this to have friends on the international stage is very important to the UK, and I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for his clear expression of support, and that friendship, it means an awful lot to our country at this time. I would also like to express my condolences to the Prime Minister and to St. Lucia for the tragic event which happened at Cul-de-sac earlier this week. The Prime Minister was kind enough to give me an update on some of the casualties which have happened there, and our best wishes and our prayers and our support go to the victims of that event. I'm delighted to have been appointed the resident British Commissioner here in St. Lucia. I look forward to working with the Prime Minister and partners all across the country.
The new resident British High Commissioner has paid courtesy calls on Governor-General of St. Lucia, Her Excellency Dame Perlette Louisi, members of government and representatives of the private and public sectors. The UK's High Commission in Castries is the only formal British representation in St. Lucia, and St. Lucia maintains a High Commission in London. McCready says he is ready to work with a wide range of people in St. Lucia to build on the solid ties between the two nations.
Trinidad's Minister of Health, Terence Singh, says he's managed to save the country $250 million by cutting costs on a new hospital. He made the announcement just ahead of a tour of the facility. CNews' Peter Christopher has the details on that story.
Work on the new Arima Hospital is still ongoing, but the Minister of Health told the media that he's managed to cut down the cost of the project.
The budget for this hospital has been reduced to date since I became Minister of Health by $250 million. That's 250 million TT dollars. So you are getting the same hospital with the same capacity, but the taxpayer and the people of Arima are being saved $250 million TT dollars.
The minister says the figure was cut down from approximately $1.88 billion to $1.52 billion after discussions with UDCOT to trim the fat. However, he assures that the cuts will not reduce the level of medical care to be provided at the hospital.
So Arima will be a 150-bed secondary care facility. Point Fortin will be a 100-bed secondary care facility. The new San Grande Hospital, we are yet to decide the exact number of beds, but it's going to be, let's say, around 150, another secondary care facility.
The minister says plans for staffing are already in place, with the expectancy it will be fully staffed by 2018.
The staffing issue there is just incremental because you're moving from the old Point Fortin to slightly more capacity. Grande, you might use the same staff or incrementally more. Where we have to look for new staff will be Arima. So some of the staff from there will come across here, and then we start to phase in the services. By that time, we have already started to work on the manpower plan for doctors, nurses, allied health care, and so on.
This plan, the minister assures, was done to avoid a repeat of the issues plaguing the Couva Hospital. The Couva facility is still closed as staff could not be found for the hospital. Peter Christopher, C News.
Moving on to news on the international scene, a U.S. Army veteran accused of fatally stabbing a homeless man in New York has been charged with murder as a hate crime. Police say he was motivated by hatred of black people. Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi reports from New York.
James Harris Jackson is paraded before reporters, arrested for fatally stabbing a 66-year-old black man with a sword on a New York street earlier in the week. Jackson turned himself into police after seeing himself caught on security cameras on the local news. He'd traveled from Baltimore to carry out the crime, and according to the NYPD, chose New York as well as his victim deliberately.
The reason why he picked New York is because it's the media capital of the world, and he wanted to make a statement. His intentions were to come here to harm male blacks, and we're very fortunate that it stopped at one, and it wasn't more.
Jackson is charged with second-degree murder as a hate crime. This brutal murder took place amid an increase in hate crimes nationally and here in New York, where they've risen more than 50% in the last year. But some say this wasn't an act of hate, it was an act of terrorism. Jackson's arrest came on the same day as the deadly attacks in London, apparently carried out by another lone attacker aiming to make a statement in a high-profile city. That event triggered a visible show of force back in New York, the NYPD increasing security at key sites like the British consulate in Manhattan. The reaction to the two attacks, some say, reveals a double standard.
This is a man who was fueled by hate, fueled by ideology, and who targeted a New Yorker for simply the color of his skin. And if this assailant were named Jabir or Jamil instead of James, I have no doubt that it would be considered an act of terrorism.
There's going to be some investigation into that.
But this former New York police officer says police acted quickly and appropriately.
Many individuals that we know in our society that wish to do others harm, and we can't figure out when the next time they're going to strike. But when you're dealing with political terrorists, somebody who's trying to change that, you can usually try to figure out where they're going. Embassies, banks, anything that has, the government's name on it.
And by the time Jackson's motivation emerged, the London attack was already receiving blanket news coverage across the world, compared to this fleeting glimpse of a man who targeted his victim based on race. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
Syrian opposition fighters are advancing in Hama province as part of their biggest offensive in months. Monitors say the rebels have seized ammunition depots and 11 villages. The Syrian government has brought in reinforcements for a counterattack. We hear more on that story.
A suicide bomber drives into a heavily guarded area, detonates an armored vehicle packed with explosives. Moments later, Syrian rebels take over the area. The same tactic is used again and again, paving the way for the opposition fighters to edge closer to the city of Hama.
In 48 hours, we have taken control of huge areas in Hama. Each area that fell to our forces had a military checkpoint or base. The offensive is underway, and our goal is to take over more territory.
But the fight is far from over. For the rebels to advance toward the city, they need to take over this military base. It's built on top of the mountain of Zain al-Abidin, which overlooks the city and provides cover for government forces. Their artillery stationed there can halt any rebel advance. and government reinforcements are on the way to the city, but the rebels remain defiant. They are seen here targeting a military checkpoint and destroying a tank. 3 Syrian army units taking part in the offensive have limited numbers of anti-tank missiles, but have managed so far to slow down the government's counter-offensive. Taking over Hama has always been a priority for the rebels. It's an important province that links Aleppo to Damascus and can serve as a launch base for rebel attacks in Latakia, President Assad's stronghold. This could explain why the rebels seem determined to capture Hama. Fierce fighting continues on the outskirts of Damascus. For the rebels, a presence in Hama could help send more supplies to thousands of fighters in besieged areas in the Damascus countryside. The opposition hopes to break the siege imposed on its fighters on the outskirts of Damascus. If they achieve that, they would be able to pose imminent threat to President Assad in the capital and reverse months of military setbacks. Hashim Ahbar, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
And now for the weather. Present weather is partly sunny. Winds are blowing from the east-southeast at 9 to 14 miles per hour. Tonight will be cloudy and the overnight low will be 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Sunset this evening will be at 6:23 p.m. and the sunrise tomorrow will be at 6:14 a.m. That brings us to the end of the ZIZ Midday Newscast. Join us this evening for these stories and more in detail. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Shaira Flanders. Have a good one.